Muslims, Indians, and gas stations, part 3. I know those first 2 were long, and I know that my views always suffer, everybody's I guess, but mine suffer when they're long. It needed all to be said. But for the sake of brevity, I made some notes for this one, so you're going to see me pause occasionally. First thing I want to say, though, is I just watched a Tucker interview with a guy named Mike Benz, that if you listen to the interview and you know what I know, it ties in actually directly and explains why our government has been trying to bring in so many Indians for the tech industry lately. So if I can find that, I watched it on another platform. If I can find it on YouTube, I'm going to link that below. Brief clarification, what I meant when I said gas stations can charge any price is they can charge any price. There's going to be a price per barrel. There's going to be other stuff that they say goes into the factors of what they can charge. But the truth is, even the price per barrel is really negligible and really not very accurate of what it costs. I mean, once the machinery is there and the crew is there, you're just taking it out of the ground. So the point is, man, they can, okay? There may be a parameter and a range to some extent, but really, if they wanted to charge $10 a gallon starting tomorrow and every gas station decided to do it at the same time, they'd be charging $10 fucking a gallon and you would pay it. And I think that Indians are like the equivalent of a business level Blockbuster. Do you remember Blockbusters? They had those back in the 70s, right? I mean, other times too, but that was really big in the 70s when they would try to get a neighborhood of people, usually white, and they wanted to put somebody else in there, specifically blacks. So they would send people around to try to buy houses, and they would offer 2, 3, 4 times what the house was worth, because as soon as one person in a neighborhood or on a street sold, the value of the rest of the homes plummeted, and then they could buy up everything else as people started to panic move for cheaper. And I think that that is what the Indians decided to do with the Muslims, and that's why, because remember I said that the Muslims had the monopoly, and you got to understand, the Muslims made all this money in the 80s and 90s when they had their tax rule. And as far as I understand, their tax rule continues. They were able to keep flipping that over. But I don't know when that runs out. I mean, I know that they had at least 20, 25 years like that. Maybe there is some statute of limitations on it, but they could put essentially 4 generations of family, or even though they're not 7-year generations, they could put these people in there and not have to pay the taxes. But like I said, they got to a point where they had made so much money, because I also said it was cash business, right? And I'm going to talk about that in a second, but it was much more of a cash business in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s because most people were still using just cash. Now, even in a gas station they might take in $2,000 a day in cash and $10,000 a day in credit. That's still what I would consider to be a huge cash business, because there are places that take in that exact same amount and they won't take in $50 in cash. And those are the ones that voluntarily will still take cash. Many businesses are trying to go to the credit-only model. But I just wanted to clarify that. So the Indians came in and they decided, well, the Muslims did so well having a monopoly over this industry. We're just going to essentially do like the Blockbusters. Like, we're going to offer to pay more for a while until we start to own the majority of things. And that is I think how they did it. I don't think they got the tax breaks. I think that is how they did it. Because this Muslim that I know told me, like, you know, when we get sick of our gas stations in the bad neighborhoods, because we can't take any more, or too many robberies, etc., too much theft, then we just sell to the Indians, because we tell the Indians this store is worth X amount and they don't question anything. You know, you could tell them that your inventory might be worth $6,000. You could tell them it's worth $40,000 and they just say, okay. And they put that in the price. That's what he said. So when I say that I've talked to a lot of Indians, what I'm talking about is I've talked to maybe 30 Indians. Okay. One of which has been in this country for over 10 years. The rest have all been here from a period of 1 month to almost 2 years. So say 29 or so of these people are all fresh off the boat. Okay. You may wonder, how come you keep saying all this shit? Why don't you get some of them on camera? Man, I have fucking tried. They are paranoid at a level that you cannot really appreciate until you talk to them, man. They are terrified. So first of all, they're not supposed to be working. And they believe that the government, immigration, whatever, will see them if they go on there and say, yeah, I work at this place and this is how I feel about they are convinced that they are micromanaged down to the level where if they even came on camera for a minute and even hinted that they'd be deported immediately. Like, they believe in their mind they'd literally be deported by the time I shut the fucking camera off. So I just can't get them to do it. I've tried. But when I say I've interviewed this many, I've interviewed like 29 or 30 of them, and I would say that 4 of them I have talked to extensively. In other words, hours and hours about these topics. So, like I said, we have to take this obviously as anecdotal because hard data doesn't exist, and because this has to be hearsay third party because they won't talk to, but I swear on my fucking life, everything I'm telling you is as verbatim as I can remember it. This does lead to an interesting point though, and I know I'm going to get some people mad at me for saying this, but dude, this is why Indians will usually never call the police on anybody for anything. Okay, if you've ever noticed that in Indian gas stations that are run by Indians, maybe not the owner, but any of the staff, any of the Indian employees, they will yell at people for stealing if they think they're stealing, but they won't actually do very much about it, and they won't call the police. And in fact, if you study them, maybe you'll need, I don't know what premise you would study them at, you'd have to stay there for a while, but you will see that oftentimes when they see packs of teens come in and decide that they're going to stick stuff in their pockets, they will do this. Like they're on their phone. Because they don't know what else to do. So, it's such a weird dynamic. Anyway, real briefly about the cash businesses. You know, the top cash businesses, I mentioned strip clubs, but that's a whole nother thing. And, casinos, like, I didn't mention casinos because, they don't count, they're regulated and their money is different, and it just, that wouldn't be a good example. Another example, though, are trade shows. Now, in the last couple of years, our government has weaponized the IRS even more so than normal, and they have now decided they're going to arm IRS agents, and they also did something very important. They changed what's called the personal income threshold. So there's something personal income threshold that you have to adhere to if you sell online, on eBay, on Amazon, and even though I'm sure they don't follow it up very strictly, at least initially, that would include Etsy, Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, anywhere else, right? So the personal income threshold is $20,000. And with eBay, it was also specifically 200 items or $20,000. So what that meant was you did not have to declare anything that you sold as income tax up to that dollar amount or that quantity of items. And Amazon's was, the dollar amount would have been the same. The quantity of items, they might have had a stipulator in there. That's what that amount includes the total, including shipping and everything, because they will not allow you to differentiate shipping, so you can't sell an item for $1 and charge $100 for shipping because it's actually a $90 item with $10 shipping, that kind of shit. So it's the total gross, but you had $20,000 to get to. So, and I'm sure there are people out there that would start separate accounts with separate banks linked to them, and they would push one account up to $19,000, and they push the next, whatever though. The point is, you didn't have, so the government decided to change the personal income threshold level to $600. Incredibly low. First of all, they do not account at all for your initial cost. Now, you can provide receipts for items to try to push this was my original cost, therefore I did not net $600 or more, I only grossed that amount. The problem is, though, that when you are selling stuff on eBay, that it might be something you found around your home, or it might have been an antique you found somewhere. You don't have receipts for this shit. Sometimes it's old. You don't have receipts, so you can't. They essentially try to give you a way of going, oh, no, we're not trying to beat you up out of your initial, but they give you a non-avenue to pursue. Now, this is much worse for trade shows. Gun shows, farmer markets, craft shows, flea markets, that kind of thing. These state governments have now started to voluntarily impose, as some states may have passed laws, most of them it's still voluntary because it's going to become a federal requirement. So they have imposed this thing on the vendors there where they have to declare everything that they sell every weekend. They're supposed to fill out a tax form, full name, address, if you have a business name, if you have a tax ID number, which most of those people don't because it's a hobby or it's a small business. It's not the kind of thing where you net the kind of money where it's worth making it an actual, quote, business. It's usually just a side hobby or a side job to get a little extra money. Even selling guns. even private sales for that kind of stuff in states where that is legal, you're not making a ton of money. You know, if you're selling at a fair, a crafts fair where you make something, or another kind of flea market where you're reselling things, you're not making that kind of money. You know, if you were making that kind of money, you'd have a business in a brick and mortar location, or you'd have a huge internet business in a warehouse and people ship. They know that you're not making that kind of money, but they want every fucking nickel. Now, why is that important? That's important because the last few places that are cash businesses, casinos, strip clubs, gas stations, and again, sticking with gas stations, they don't push that same kind of regulation. Very selective. And I ask you again to think about why, and I think I've got some answers, and I'm gonna point you to that Tucker Carlson video. You got to watch that. I also have to point out the fact that the media cycle, that certain small group of people, they don't want certain things in the news. So they're just not going to have an expose piece, a 5-part series from some local station that goes around station to station saying, hey, so what's your name? How long have you lived in this country? Are you it's just not going to work. Even if every place they went to, they got shut down by whoever was working, going, no talk. Even if that happened, they still wouldn't do that. That would make interesting news. A lot of people would watch that, I think. A lot of people would have an interest in that. But they're not going to do it. They're not going to do it for the same way that INS or the equivalent and the IRS just doesn't seem to notice that this shit happens there. Okay, and this is my last point. I'll wrap this up, man. This is something I forgot to mention to you, but this is about the Indian student thing, okay? So if you watch the Tucker interview, or if you just can figure this shit out on your own, one of the reasons that Indians are being brought in so much under the guise of tech, some of them are needed for tech, and some of them specifically versus any other American or other person, because of their desire to follow orders to get what they want, and because it has to do with the censorship machine. But I want to tell you a little bit more about how their student visas work, because there was a couple of things that I forgot, and one thing I didn't know. And so I said that there was a staffing agency that they get their placement from. It tells them what particular tech field they go into, what colleges and what cities they can go to, and then it helps them get the housing, right? And then I also explained that afterwards, if they don't get a job in their field, as is a requirement, within 3 months, they can start to pay this place a monthly stipend. This is every month. This isn't like a one-time fee. I was telling somebody this, and like, oh, so they pay one time, they pay like, no. They pay every month, man. They get beat up every month for this money. But did you know that they pay quadruple tuition? Think about that, man. Think about these fucking colleges, the way they are just raping these people. I mean, most of the time, these jobs that they are pushing them into are 2-year degrees, so the equivalent of an associate degree. They're not forced to go to college for 6 years. You get 2-year tech degrees, right? So if the average person, I talked to one who gave me his personal numbers. The average person pays $4,000 per semester for their exact same degree. They are paying $16,000 for the same semester for the same education, man. That's crazy. You know, and I say this because why are they allowed to profiteer like that? And also, think about the bottom line. How much more incentive they have to get those people to enroll than anybody else. They no longer really have an incentive to get regular Americans into school to do those jobs when they have a plethora of people to draw from that they can charge, on average, triple to quadruple tuition for the exact same thing. Big fucking business, isn't it? Well, I think that in itself is fascinating, man. The final thing that I want to tell you that I actually didn't know, and one of them had told me this a while ago, and I kind of didn't understand it, so I got the lowdown on this dude, and I begged this guy to come on camera, and he said maybe if I let him wear a mask and use the voice changer. I'm like, bro, what? To talk about what you're legally doing in this? He won't do it, so I'm just going to tell you. So another part of this whole scam thing for them is that once they have gotten their degree even if they are paying this monthly stipend to stay here, which, you know, it's funny. You pay this monthly stipend to stay here. You're supposed to be getting a job in your field and yet you pay this monthly stipend for a year every month, and they never ask you, well, how are you living? If you don't have a job in your field, how are you living? You know, where are you living? How are you eating? They don't ever seem to ask that, because, you know, those are pesky questions. But they have mandatory job fairs. So I can't imagine a job fair is ever really an extremely pleasant place to be. But these Indian job fairs, when they go there, they talk to these tech companies in their field, several different fields, you know, code writing, etc., right? And the company that runs the job fair, so another scam company, the staffing company, the extending your residency, temporary residency company, and now you've got your job fair company. So these companies force these guys to go into contracts. Okay? Dude, these contracts are rough. So once they get a legitimate job here, they actually do have to start paying regular income tax. But guess what? They've also got to pay a piece to that company for a long time, at least 2 years, sometimes longer, at least 2 years. They have to pay a percentage. What's that percentage? He said the average contract starts at $20.80. 20% of your fucking gross right out of the gate, right out of college, 20%. So if you've already got some kind of student loan or the equivalent of that in India, your family mortgaged whatever they had to turn their rupees into dollars to get you this education at quadruple the cost. Now you got to take 20% right off the top just to go to this agency, plus still pay taxes and try to live, right? But the best part is that, because, see, one of them in particular that I was talking to has been here now almost 2 years. And I told him this when I first met him, that they're fucking you and these jobs aren't real and you're not going to get anywhere with this. But he now gets it. And he said, I do not understand why so many Indians. At first was some, and now so many. Every day, more Indians, more Indians. Why do my people not stay in India? Yeah, okay. So here's what happens, buddy. They're diluting the job market. And I got that countered with this. Well, guess what? When these people want to get jobs through the job fair, they counter the contract with the 2080 to a 3070. Because some are so desperate for jobs, they will offer 30% of their net. And he says when the more crowded they get, they will actually get people that offer 50-50. They offer the company, right in the contract at 2080, they offer them the 50-50 split for a minimum of 2 years so that they get placed first. That's how bad it is.